A black town car sat idling on Hollis Street.
Are you Renae Coleman?
Porches had plywood over the windows, and the other half were trying hard not to. It did not belong here. It looked like a piece cut out of a
My father
different city
died
and
9
dropped
days
on
ago.
the wrong block by mistake.
He told me to find you, to pay what he owed.
Nobody ever owed me a thing.
A driver behind him, and the cold coming up the steps like it had been invited.
This doesn't belong on a doorstep.
She kept one hand on the doorframe.
If you came to
and the
take
other
something,
curled around the folded paper in her
get
apron
in line.
pocket. Depends who's asking. If it's money, I don't have it. If you came to take something, get in line. He didn't blink. My father died 9
We've been looking for you for 2 years.
He told me to find you and pay what he owed. The cold circled her ankles. Wrong house, she said. Nobody ever owed me a dime in my life. We've been looking for you for 2 years, Miss Coleman. He didn't step forward. He just waited, like a man certain the door would open. This doesn't belong on a doorstep. May I come in? Before we go any further, do me a favor and drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. The morning shift, the late drive home, the middle of a night that won't quiet down. I always wonder who's out there, because this one starts with a waitress who used to be a singer, a debt nobody wrote down, and a stranger whose dead father swore, with his last breath, that he owed her everything. It was a little past 7 on a gray March morning. An hour before that knock, Renae had been standing at the counter, watering down the last of the milk. She poured it slow so the splash wouldn't carry up the stairs. Behind the cereal box sat the eviction notice, folded into a hard little square the way you fold a thing you don't want to look at twice. $1,240 behind. She pressed it an inch deeper, like hiding a knife. She still wore the uniform from the Copper Kettle, the diner 2 streets over where Dale Croft liked to call her in early, send her home before the good tips landed, and count the hours. However, the math suited him that week. $2.90 an hour plus whatever the room felt like leaving. Some weeks the room felt like nothing. In the hall closet, though, hung something older, a midnight blue dress, the sequins gone dull, the hem let out twice. She had worn it on the dinner cruises out of the harbor, and later at the Blue Room, back when a man named Otis Freeman told her she had a voice that could hold a whole room up on its worst night. She'd quit singing years ago when the money ran out, and the babysitting didn't. And still, she could not make herself give that dress away. Then the knock came. 3 slow raps. Her stomach dropped, because a knock that early only ever meant the bank. Everett Sinclair stepped into the house the way some men step into rooms they mean to leave quickly. He read the place first, the water stain on the ceiling, the work boots by the door, with one heel resoled and one not, the little transistor radio on the sill. He read the house the way other people read a face, and whatever it told him did not soften him. It only made him more certain. He set a flat white box on the table. Open it. Renae didn't move toward it. I've had men leave boxes before. Usually there's a bill taped underneath. There's no bill. My father kept this 11 years. I drove 4 hours to put it back in your hands. She lifted the lid. Inside, folded into a careful square, was a coat. Dark, worn at the cuffs, one button near the collar a half shade off from the rest, sewn back on by hand in a hurry, years and years ago, by her hand. Her breath left her in one long pull. Where did you get this? She didn't say it like a question. Her thumb had already found the mismatched button and stopped there. From a car that went off the Kessler Bridge, Everett said. In an ice storm, the night my father should have died and didn't. She had built a whole life on not remembering that night. But the coat was in her hands now, and the cold came back all at once, from the inside out. I was 22, she said, almost to the table, coming off a double at the club. No radio, half asleep. The guardrail was just gone. Black marks in the snow. She turned the cuff over in her fingers the way. You touch a scar to make sure it's still yours. I wasn't anybody official. I just stopped. Tell me what you found. He had not raised his voice once. Somehow that made it heavier. A car in the ravine, on its roof. A man pinned inside. The window had popped, but the door wouldn't give. She swallowed. It was so cold I couldn't feel my hands by the end. I pushed my coat through the gap so he'd have something. I held his hand through the glass, and I kept him talking so he wouldn't slip under. She set the coat down gently, like it could still bruise. And when I heard the sirens coming up the road, I climbed out, and I got in my car, and I drove home. I never gave my name. My tags were 4 months expired, and that car was how I got to work. I told myself somebody official was coming, and they didn't need a broke girl there to blame. For a moment, Everett Sinclair did not look like a wall. He lived, he said. My father lived because a girl with expired tags climbed into a ditch and refused to leave him alone in the dark. The kitchen went still as a held breath. Upstairs, a floorboard shifted, and then there was a big, slow tread on the stairs. Eli came down, 24, shoulders like his mother had never quite gotten used to, moving careful the way he'd moved since he came home from his last tour. He'd been out 8 months. The VA had him on sertraline and a waiting list for a counselor, and most mornings the hardest thing he did was come downstairs. He stopped when he saw the stranger, and his whole body went ready. "It's all right, baby," Renae said, wiping her face with the back of her wrist. "This is Mr. Sinclair. He drove a long way to tell me something. Something good, believe it or not." Eli didn't believe it, but he crossed the kitchen and stood at his mother's shoulder, and Everett Sinclair looked at the two of them, the tired woman and the watchful young man leaning toward her like she was the last steady thing in the room. For 1 second, the cold thing in his face cracked straight down the middle. He'd never had a shoulder to lean on like that. His own father's hands had always been full of somebody else's debt. He put the look away fast. But Renae saw it, and she would remember that she had. He didn't slide a check across the table. He let it stay in his coat, and that, more than anything, told her he had not come to be thanked. "The money's the simple part," he said. "Enough to clear what's behind you and keep this house. My father named the figure himself, and I won't insult you by arguing it down. But I didn't drive 4 hours to leave paper on a stranger's table. My father left more than money, Miss Coleman. He left questions. And 11 years ago on that bridge, you became part of the answer without ever knowing it. A more broken woman would have taken the check and asked nothing. Renae had been broken in most of the ways a person can break, but not that one." She pushed the white box an inch back toward him. "Then tell me the questions first," she said, "before you tell me what they cost." The story moved through Ridgemont the way water moves through a cracked foundation. First a trickle, then everywhere at once. By the end of the first week, people had seen the black car twice. By the second week, they had a theory, and it was not kind. This was a town that had been lied to for 20 years. By the mill that closed, by men in coat-scokes who made promises and left with the pension fund. It had learned to assume the worst of anyone who showed up looking rich. The version that spread was simple and ugly. Renae Coleman, who couldn't keep a marriage, couldn't keep ahead of her rent, couldn't keep anything, had finally found herself a rich man and was working an angle. It gave people who had nothing the warm little feeling of being better than somebody. She felt it before she understood it, and then she felt it all at once, in the one place she couldn't afford to lose. The copper kettle was thinning out after the lunch rush. Renae was refilling sugar caddies when Roy Tanner swiveled on his stool. She'd gone to high school with him. He'd had that grin even then, the kind with no warmth in it. "Hey, Coleman," he said, pitched for the whole room. "That rich fella, he paying you by the hour or just for the night?" Two men down the counter laughed into their coffee. Behind the register, Dale Croft found something fascinating to study on the floor and said nothing, because Roy tipped well and Renae did not. Dale had docked her a full shift that week and called it a scheduling error. He was good at errors that only ever ran one direction. Renae kept her hands moving over the caddies, because if they shook, Roy won. And then the door chime went, and a voice cut clean across the room. My mother is not a liar. Ely stood just inside the door, still in his field jacket, and the whole diner turned. His voice wasn't loud. It shook a little. He did not stop, Hop. You don't know one true thing about what's happening. Not one. You just like the sound of your own mouth. The friar ticked in the quiet. Roy Tanner's grin came off his face an inch at a time, because a returning soldier who could barely make it down his own stairs some mornings had just said the thing every grown person in that room had been too small to say to themselves. Renae set down the caddy, untied her apron, and walked over. She took her son's arm, and she walked him out with whatever dignity she had left, and the bell over the door rang behind them like the end of something. Eli held it together until they were in the truck. Then his hands started to go, that fine tremor she'd learned not to grab at. I'm sorry he got out. I know you told me to stay home. I couldn't sit up there and let them. Baby, you did nothing wrong. She reached over and covered his shaking hand with her own and held it the way you steady something that might fall. You stood up for a story you don't even have all of yet. That's the bravest thing I've watched anybody do in years. And Renae sat in the lot of the diner that had just turned on her, holding her boy's hand, staring through the windshield at a town she'd spent her whole life apologizing to. And for the first time in longer than she could name, she felt something other than tired. She felt anger, clean and hot, and pointed, for once, at the right thing. That night, after Eli finally slept, she called the number Everett had left. Her hand was not entirely steady. I need all of it, she said when he answered. Not the careful version. All of it. My son defended me in front of half this town today and I couldn't back him up, because I don't have the whole story to give him. So, whatever you've been holding, bring it tomorrow. I'm done waiting in the dark for it. There was a silence on the line. When he spoke, the cold had gone out of his voice, and what was under it was worse. I'll come in the morning, he said. But when you've heard all of it, Ms. Coleman, you may wish I'd left it in the ground with him. She set 2 cups of coffee on the table the next morning and waited like a woman waiting on a test result. Everett came in with a soft-cornered leather folder. He didn't touch the coffee. My father was nobody before that bridge, he said. A man who ran freight numbers for Meridian. After it, he was somebody. He built things. He told me once that nearly dying changes the arithmetic of a person. He turned a page. And the whole time, underneath all of it, he was looking for you. There was no record you were ever there. You were the woman who wasn't supposed to exist. I told you why, Renae said. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup and didn't drink. I know why. He was quiet a moment. I was 9 when his car went off that bridge. He came home a stranger. He'd sit across from me at dinner, and you could watch him leave the room without standing up. Down in that ravine, running numbers on what he could and couldn't save. He turned the next page harder than he needed to. I grew up losing to a ghost every single year. So no, I don't think the search cost him time. I think it cost him the only time he had left. But that's not the hard part either. He slid a photograph onto the table, then a second one beside it. 2 wrecks, 2 patches of broken snow. Why are there 2 cars, Renae said, and something cold walked up her spine. Because there were 2 that night. My father's was the one you reached. There was a second vehicle on the far side of the ravine, down where you never could have seen it from the road. He stopped, and for the first time he looked unsure he should go on. By the time the real crews found it, the man inside was already gone. He died that night, Miss Coleman. 40 feet from where you were kneeling in the snow, on the wrong side of the rocks, where nobody could have reached him in time. Renae set her cup down. Her hand had stopped being steady. Stop, she said. Don't sit at my table and turn me into a hero in a story where a man died 40 feet away and I never even heard him. I gave a stranger my coat. I didn't save anybody. I just landed on the lucky side of the ditch. My father thought the same thing about himself. For 11 years, Everett said. He believed his car drifted across the line in the ice and put that second car into the ravine. He carried two debts. One he could pay. He touched the white box, and one he never could. He found out who the man in the second car was, and it broke something in him that never healed back. Renae was quiet a long moment. Then she made herself ask it. Did he ever learn the man's name? Everett turned the folder so she could see the page clipped inside, an obituary. A grainy photo above a few short lines. And Renae Coleman felt the floor of her life tilt sideways. She knew that face. She pushed back from the chair so hard, the legs barked against the linoleum. Where did you get this? You know him, Everett said. It wasn't a question. That man. She had to stop and start again. That man taught me how to hold a note and hold my chin up at the same time. His name was Otis Freeman. She couldn't say more at first. The years folded in on themselves, and she was 20 again. Before the bridge, before the marriage, before she'd learned how the world sets its prices. He had a supper club. The Blue Room, my first real stage. I was 17 and angry at everything, and he handed me a microphone anyway. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth so the sound wouldn't carry. He used to say a full room and a steady song could hold a person up on their worst morning. He held a lot of people up. He held me up. And then one winter he was just gone. The Blue Room closed. Folks said he took work down in Carolina. Her eyes filled. Carolina. That's where everybody in this town goes when it stops feeding them. Or where we tell ourselves they went. He didn't go to Carolina, Everett said. No, she said. He went into a ravine off the Kessler Bridge, 40 feet from me, on the worst night of my life that I thought was a story about a guardrail and a stranger. She put her hand flat on the table to keep herself in the room. I grieved him as a man who left. I never once got to grieve him as a man who died. Everett let her sit with it. He didn't rush her, and that, finally, was the first kind thing he'd done in her house. When she could breathe again, he turned another page, and his voice went careful. There's a reason I came when I came. When Otis Freeman died, his family had nothing. The club was mortgaged to the roof. The bank took it inside a year. His wife held on as long as she could, and the grief and the bills took her too, not long after. He laid down one more clipping. There was a boy, 18 when his father vanished. No money, no people left. He believed, everybody let him believe that his daddy walked out on him in the club and all of it. He drifted off the map. The trail we picked up is 7 years cold. Otis had a son, Renae said. She remembered it suddenly, a small boy in the back booth on slow afternoons, swinging his feet, humming along off-key while she rehearsed. Terrence. Terry, he'd be 29 now if he's still alive. Everett folded his hands. And here's where I have to be honest about the clock. My father set aside a fund for that boy, a large one. But the will gives me until the end of this year to find him. After that, by terms my father wrote before his mind was clear, the money reverts to a board of people who never met him. They think the whole thing was a dying man's guilt. They'd prefer to be right. He looked at her. I have 10 weeks. After that, even I stopped looking. Renae stood at the window with her back to him, looking out at the town that had broken her heart the day before. When she turned around, the tiredness was gone. Then we're not done, she said. I've spent 2 years and a great deal of money, Everett said. The records run out. I don't know what else there is to try. I do. She tapped the table. You've been hunting Otis Freeman's boy in databases. But that boy came up in a town. He had a church, a back booth, people who fed him on Saturdays. You can't pull that off a server, Mr. Sinclair. You have to have stood in the room. She picked up the obituary of the man who'd given her the only steady thing she owned. 10 weeks. All right, then we start tonight. It was the town that cracked it open in the end. The same town that had shamed her. A search that size can't stay quiet in a place that's small. And as word spread of what Renae Coleman and the rich man were actually doing, trying to bring home the lost son of a Ridgemont man who died forgotten and unpaid, something shifted in the cracked foundation of the place. Gus Tillman, who ran the hardware store, whose own father had cooked the kitchen at the Blue Room for 15 years, went into his back room and came out with an old payroll ledger. In it was the name of a man who'd worked the line beside Otis and was still living out past Marrow Creek. That man remembered the church the Freemans moved to in their last hard year. That church had a sexton who'd kept the old rolls. Those rolls led to a county relief office, where a retired clerk looked at the obituary Renae laid on her kitchen table and at Renae's face and wrote down not an address, but the name of a warehouse district in Crawford City, 300 miles off, where she'd last heard the young man had landed. Even Roy Tanner had a hand in it. His sister had crossed paths with the Freeman boy years back in the cheap rooming houses where kids with no family wash up. Roy drove 2 hours each way to confirm the trail was good before Renae made the long trip. He came by the house to drop off the notes and stood on the porch with his cap in his hands and would not come in. "My sister wrote it all down," he said, holding out a folded scrap. "Last place she knew, probably still good." Renae took it. She looked at the man who'd called her a name in front of her own son, and she did not make it easy for him because it was owed. "Why?" Roy looked at the street instead of at her. "My old man sang in that room every Friday for years, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. Otis let him up on the mic anyway, told the crowd to be kind. He turned the cap once in his hands. Didn't know that was the same man, that's all. He put the cap back on and went down the steps. He never did say the word sorry, but he'd driven 4 hours for it, and that, Renae understood, was the closest thing a man like Roy had in him. Dale Croft did not get to be part of it. While the whole town was reaching for one thread of decency, an auditor from the diner's parent company came through on a routine pass and pulled the schedules. It turned out Dale had been shaving hours off half his floor staff for 3 years and pocketing the difference, Renae's docked shifts among them. $11,000 in wage theft, most of it stolen from women who couldn't afford to notice. He was walked out that Friday. There would be a hearing and back pay and his name in the county paper under a word he'd never once thought would attach to him. He came to the house before he left town. Renae met him on the porch and did not ask him in. "I let them say those things about you," Dale said. He couldn't hold her eyes. "I stood there and let them, because you never gave me a reason to be scared of you. That's the truth of it. I only ever leaned on the ones who couldn't lean back." His voice broke on the last of it. "I'm sorry. It doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't." "No," Renae said, "it doesn't." But she said it without heat, because a man finally seeing the shape of his own smallness is its own kind of sentence, and she had a longer road to drive than his. His name was Terry Freeman, 29, 300 miles away, in a rented room, working nights at a warehouse with no idea anyone was looking for him, or ever had. Everett offered to send a lawyer. Renae wouldn't have it. "A man does not learn the truth about his father from a stranger in a suit," she said. "Otis Freeman fed and hired half this town and never once made it feel like charity. I'm not sending his boy a contract. I'm going myself." So she drove the 300 miles, and she sat across a chipped table from Terry Freeman in a coffee shop near the loading docks, and the young man looked at her with the flat, guarded eyes of someone who'd learned early that everyone who comes looking wants something. "You knew my dad. It wasn't a welcome, it was a test." "I did. The Blue Room. I was a kid with a chip on my shoulder, and he put a microphone in my hand anyway." "Okay." His jaw worked. "So what is this? You drove all this way to tell me what a great man he was, right before he took off and left a teenager to figure out the world alone." "He didn't take off," Renae said. "Don't." His voice came across the table like a slammed door. "I spent half my life learning how not to need a father. You don't get to drive up here and undo it in an afternoon with a nice story." "What did that piece cost you?" she said. It stopped him. He'd built a wall against grief and against pity, and nobody had ever come at him from the side like that, with a question instead of a speech. "I knew him 6 years," Renae said. before he could rebuild it. He taught me how to hold a note when my voice was shaking and how to apologize without groveling. He kept something in his coat pocket he wouldn't let anybody touch. She held his eyes. I'm not here to tell you who you are, Terry. I'm here because he would never forgive me if I knew the truth and let you keep believing the lie. Then she laid two things on the table between them, the obituary and a photograph of the broken guardrail on the Kessler Bridge, black marks in the snow. Your father didn't leave you, she said. He died on that bridge in an ice storm 11 years ago, on the wrong side of a ditch where nobody could reach him in time. The town told you, Carolina. The truth is he never got off that road. He didn't abandon you, baby. He was taken from you. There's a difference. And you've had a right to it for 11 years. And I am sorry to God that it's me this late, in a coffee shop. Terry Freeman stared at the photograph and didn't move. Did he even know about me? He said, finally. And the hard thing in his voice cracked straight down the middle, at the end. Or was I just some kid he hauled to work on Saturdays? He brought you every Saturday he could, Renae said. You sat in the back booth and hummed along off-key while I rehearsed, and he'd tell anybody who'd hold still that you were going to be twice the man he was. Her own voice gave out. He talked about you every single week, Terry, to everyone. And Terry Freeman, 29 years old, who had spent his whole life believing he belonged to no one, put his head down on that table and wept like the child he'd never once been allowed to be. Renae came around the table and put her hand on his shoulder, the way Otis Freeman had once put his on hers on a morning she'd thought about quitting everything. And she held on, and she did not let go. Terry came back to Ridgemont with her, not for the money, though the fund was real, and reached him with a week to spare. He came for the rest of it, for a town 300 miles away where old men remembered his father and wanted to shake his hand. It was Gus Tillman who brought out the last of it. His father had saved more than a ledger. In a box in the back of the hardware store sat Otis Freeman's old road case, the little one he carried between sets, kept all these years by a man who couldn't throw it out any more than Renae could throw out that blue dress. Gus set it on the counter, and his hands were not steady. Inside, under a coil of worn cable, folded soft with handling, was a sheet of paper. On one side, in a musician's cramped pencil, half a song that was never finished, and written across the top, the title. For Terry. On the back, in the enormous careful crayon of a little boy, a tall stick figure and a small one holding hands in front of a square that was meant to be the club. At the bottom, me and Daddy. Terry had drawn it when he was 5. Otis Freeman had carried it in his road case every working night of his life, right up to the night he died. The boy who made it had long since stopped being little. The father had never once stopped carrying it. Terry held it in both hands, and his shoulders shook, and at last, he understood the thing the photograph couldn't say, that he had not been abandoned. He'd been carried the whole time. He just never knew whose hands were doing it. He moved to Ridgemont that spring, into the room across from Eli's, and the two young men. The veteran learning how to come home, and the orphan learning he'd had a family all along, became the brothers neither of them had. For the first time in years, the house had the sounds tone of more than 2 people in it. Everett Sinclair came one last time that summer. The Blacktown car was gone. He drove himself now, an ordinary sedan, and he parked it in the drive on Hollis Street like a man who'd earned the right to. They sat on the porch as the streetlights came on down the block. Renae, Eli, Terry, and the man who'd knocked one gray morning with the cold coming in behind him. My father used to say he owed 2 debts, Everett said, watching the light catch over the corner, one he could pay and one he never could. He looked at Terry, then at Renae. He was wrong about the second one. He just didn't live long enough to see it paid. You hated it, Renae said. It wasn't a question. All those years he spent on people who weren't you. Everett didn't answer right away. A car passed at the end of the block, and its lights swept the porch and were gone. I thought the guilt had taken his mind. I thought he'd traded his own son for two strangers in a ravine, and I spent a long time being angry at a dead man about it. He turned his father's wedding band on his own bare hand, looking at nothing. He wasn't chasing strangers. He was trying to teach me the one thing he ran out of time to say out loud, that the people the world forgets are still owed something. He was quiet. I just didn't understand, until I drove up here, that I was one of them. I was the stranger he was reaching for the whole time. He had to find the other two first, to show me how. Later that night, Renae found the crayon drawing on the kitchen table, where Terry had set it down to hold his coffee. She picked it up to put it somewhere safe. And that was when she saw the new line, added in pencil, in her son's steady hand along the bottom edge. Eli had written it sometime that week, without telling anyone. Found family counts. Renae Coleman stood in her small saved house and read it for a long time. Then she set the drawing on the mantel where the morning light would find it. And for the first time, in more years than she wanted to count, she went to the closet, took the blue dress off its hanger, and sat down at the kitchen window, and she sang, not loud, not for anybody, just the half a song Otis never finished, filling in the end the way she thought he might have wanted it. She didn't water down the milk the next morning. She hadn't for weeks. But she kept the old dress out of the closet now, hung on the back of the kitchen door. The way you keep the one thing that taught you who you were going to be. Here's what I keep turning over, and I want your honest answer down in the comments. Renae Coleman did one decent thing on a freezing bridge 11 years before any of this, expecting nothing, knowing nothing, never even leaving her name. Some of you will say that's exactly why it came back around to her. That the good we do in the dark, with nobody watching and no reward in sight, is the only good that ever truly counts. But others will say it never should have taken a dying man, a fortune, and 11 years for a good woman to catch one break. That she and her boy were shamed and starved while the world looked away. And the waiting is the part nobody should ever forget. So tell me straight, was this a story about a kindness rewarded, or a story about how long good people are made to wait for it? Pick a side and tell me why. I read every single one.